Please, can you help my mommy before my daddy hurts her again?" The words pierced through the rumble of 12 Harley engines like a thunderclap. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club had just rolled into their compound at 2:17 a.m., exhausted from a long ride, when they spotted her. A little black girl in a pink dress, who is no older than 7, stood barefoot at their steel gate, trembling in the cold night air. Her hair was wild, her knees scraped and bleeding. In her small hands, she clutched a school bag nearly as big as her entire body. George Murray, the club president with a shaved head, intricate sleeve tattoos, and a salt and pepper beard, killed his engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the roar before it. 12 battle-hardened men stared at the child who'd somehow breached their security in the middle of nowhere. "How did you get here, sweetheart?" George's voice was gentle, careful, as he slowly dismounted and approached the gate. His leather vest creaked in the stillness. "I ran." The girl's voice shook, but her eyes held a determination that didn't belong to someone so young. "I ran from my house. Mommy said if Daddy ever hurt her really bad, I should find the men with leather jackets and big hearts who protect people." Chains, the club's enforcer with scarred knuckles and a face that had seen too many fights, stepped forward. "Where's your mommy now?" The little girl's chin quivered. "At home. She's hurt. There was so much blood on her face. Daddy punched her and kicked her, and she stopped moving. I tried to wake her up, but she just made a sound like this." The child made a terrible wheezing noise that made every man's blood run cold. "What's your name?" George knelt down slowly, keeping his distance so he wouldn't scare her. Gift Campbell." She shifted the heavy bag on her shoulder. "I'm 7 years old, and my daddy is Barnabas Campbell. He's a bad man, a really, really bad man." The name hung in the air like poison. George's face went rigid. Several bikers exchanged dark glances. They knew that name. Everyone in their world knew Barnabas Campbell, arms dealer, wife beater, a man with connections that reached into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. "Gift, why did you come here?" George asked carefully. "How did you know about us?" "Mommy used to drive past here sometimes when Daddy was at work. She showed me this place and made me memorize how to get here. She said you were the good kind of scary. The kind that fights monsters." Gift's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy is a monster." "Sweetheart, what's in the bag?" asked Ratchet, the club's mechanic, pointing to the school bag she gripped so tightly. Gift looked down at it, then back up at the circle of leather-clad bikers surrounding her. She seemed to be making a decision, weighing whether to trust these strangers her mother had told her about. Finally, she unzipped it. What she pulled out made every man in that compound go absolutely still. First came a blood-soaked scarf, then a shattered iPhone with a cracked screen, then a flash drive on a beaded keychain, and finally, wrapped in a Ziploc bag, a small digital voice recorder. "Mommy told me to take these if something bad happened." Gift's small fingers trembled as she held them out. "She said they're called evidence, Durance." She said without evidence, "Nobody believes women like her because men like Daddy are good at pretending to be nice to everyone except us." George carefully took the flash drive. "Gift, what's on this?" "Pictures, videos, voice recordings." The little girl recited it like a lesson she'd memorized. "Mommy started collecting them 6 months ago. She said she was building a case. She said if anything happened to her, I had to get these to the police or to—" She looked up at George. "Or to men who would actually do something about bad guys." "The phone?" Chains asked, his voice tight. 3 years of text messages, pictures of Mommy's bruises, voice messages where Daddy threatens to kill her. Gift's voice was eerily calm now, like she was reading from a script. And the recorder has the bad things Daddy talks about with his friend. The illegal stuff. Mommy said that's what they call additional charges. One of the younger bikers, a man they called Smoke, let out a low whistle. "This kid just brought us enough evidence to—" He never finished the sentence. The distant sound of engines cut through the night. Not motorcycles. Cars. Multiple cars, moving fast. Gift's entire body went rigid. Her eyes widened with pure, primal terror. "That's Daddy's friends," she whispered, backing toward George. "They drive black SUVs with tinted windows. Sometimes they have guns." Headlights swept across the compound entrance. One vehicle. 2. 3 black SUVs, just like she'd described, sliding to aggressive stops in front of the gate, kicking up dust and gravel. "Please!" Gift grabbed George's hand, her small fingers digging into his calloused palm. "Please don't let them take me." "If they take me back, Daddy will—" Her voice broke. "He'll make me disappear like he said he would, just like he made Mommy stop moving." The Iron Saints moved into formation without a word. 12 men formed a wall between the little girl in the pink dress and whatever was about to emerge from those vehicles. George looked down at Gift, then at the blood-soaked evidence in her school bag, then at his brothers standing ready beside him. "Stay behind me," he told her quietly. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." The first SUV door opened. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything. Subscribe to find out what the Iron Saints discovered when they opened that flash drive, and why Barnabas Campbell was willing to kill his own daughter to keep it hidden. 45 minutes earlier. The Iron Saints had been riding for 6 hours straight, coming back from a charity run in the next county over. George Murray's back ached. His hands were cramped from gripping the handlebars, and all he wanted was a cold beer and his bed. They weren't the young hellraisers they used to be. These days, the club mostly did toy drives, escorted abuse survivors to court, and tried to stay on the right side of the law. It hadn't always been that way. As George pulled into the compound and killed his engine, he caught his reflection in his bike's mirror. The tattoos crawling up his neck told stories he wished he could forget. The iron cross on his throat, a reminder of the man he'd killed in self-defense at 23. The broken chains on his forearms, symbols of the prison time he'd served. The angel wings across his shoulders, a memorial to his baby sister who'd died because he hadn't been there to protect her from her abusive boyfriend. Every inch of ink was a scar. Every scar was a lesson learned too late. "George, you good?" Chains called out, pulling off his helmet. The enforcer's scarred knuckles were wrapped in tape from an earlier altercation with some drunk who'd gotten handsy with a waitress. "Yeah, just tired." George dismounted, stretching his back. "Getting too old for these long rides." "We're all getting too old," Ratchet laughed, rubbing his knee. "But somebody's got to deliver those presents to kids who'd otherwise get nothing for Christmas." That's what they were now. Men trying to buy redemption one good deed at a time. Men trying to become the protectors they'd needed when they were young and broken. And then Gift Campbell appeared at their gate. Present moment. The SUV doors opened in unison. 3 men stepped out, not cops, not civilians. These were professionals, the kind who wore expensive suits over bulletproof vests and carried weapons they knew how to use. But it was the 4th man who made George's jaw clench. Barnabas Campbell stumbled out of the lead vehicle, clearly drunk, his shirt half untucked, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "I know she's in there," Barnabas shouted toward the gate. "That little brat took something that belongs to me." George stepped forward, keeping Gift hidden behind him. "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody's come through here tonight except my club." "Don't lie to me!" Barnabas lurched forward, but was steadied by one of his associates. "My daughter, 7 years old. Pink dress. She ran away with a bag full of my property." "Your property?" Chaines's voice dripped with venom. "That what you call your kid?" One of the suited men raised a hand. "Gentlemen, we don't want trouble. We're just looking for a lost child. Her father is worried sick." George nearly laughed at the absurdity. Behind him, pressed against his leg, Gift trembled so violently he could feel it through his jeans. Her small hand gripped the leather of his vest like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. "Like I said," George kept his voice level, "nobody's been here, but if we see a lost kid, we'll call the authorities. That's the proper way to handle these things, right?" Barnabas's face contorted. "You don't understand. That bag. She has things that could—" He caught himself, aware that he was saying too much. "Just give her back. This is family business." "Family business." George repeated the words slowly. Behind him, he heard Gift's sharp intake of breath. "The kind of family business that leaves a woman unconscious on her kitchen floor?" The air went cold. Barnabas's eyes narrowed. "What did that little—" He stopped himself again, but the damage was done. His reaction told George everything he needed to know. The suited man who seemed to be in charge stepped forward. "Mr. Campbell, perhaps we should continue this conversation through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Barnabas laughed bitterly. "These biker trash don't care about proper anything. They're harboring a fugitive. They're obstructing—" "Your daughter is 7 years old," George interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "What exactly is she a fugitive from?" The question hung in the air. Barnabas opened his mouth, then closed it. His associates exchanged glances. They were realizing, George knew, that they'd played this wrong. That showing up here drunk and desperate made them look guilty of something. "Last chance," Barnabas said, his hand moving toward his waistband. "Give me the bag." Or 12 Harleys roared to life simultaneously. The Iron Saints, who'd been standing in the shadows, mounted their bikes in perfect synchronization. The message was clear. You pull that weapon, and this becomes a very different kind of night. The suited men immediately put hands on Barnabas's shoulders, restraining him. "Sir, we need to leave. Now." "But the drive—" "Now, Mr. Campbell." As they loaded Barnabas back into the SUV, he screamed over his shoulder. "She's my daughter. You can't keep her from me. I'll call the police. Please do," George called back. "We'd love to talk to the police about what we found tonight." The threat landed. Barnabas went silent. The SUVs peeled out, leaving scorched rubber and the smell of burning clutch in their wake. The moment they disappeared, George turned to find Gift collapsed behind Ratchet's Harley, her small body shaking with silent sobs. The school bag lay beside her, its contents spilled across the concrete, evidence of horrors no child should have to collect. Chains immediately moved to secure the perimeter. "Ratchet, get the cameras up. Smoke, watch the back entrance. They're coming back." "George?" It was Tiny, the club's youngest member, barely 25. "What did the kid tell you? What's really going on?" George knelt beside Gift, who was trying desperately to stuff everything back into her bag with shaking hands. "Gift, sweetheart, you're safe now. Can you tell my brothers what you told me about how you got here?" Gift looked up at the circle of leather-clad men surrounding her. In the compound's floodlights, they looked exactly like what they were, dangerous men with violent pasts. But her mother had seen something else, something Gift was choosing to trust. "I waited until Daddy passed out on the couch," she whispered. "Mommy taught me what to do if things got really bad. She had everything ready in my school bag, the evidence, snacks, a flashlight. She said if Daddy ever hurt her so bad she couldn't talk, I should run." "How far did you run?" Smoke asked gently. "I don't know. Forever." Gift's voice cracked. "I followed the broken white line on the highway, just like Mommy showed me. My feet hurt so much. But Mommy said if I ever needed real help, I should find the men with leather jackets and big hearts. She said you were the only ones who would actually fight the monsters." George felt something break inside his chest. "Your mother knew about us?" Gift nodded. "She said you helped some lady last year, a lady whose husband was hurting her, and you made sure she got away safe. Mommy read about it in the newspaper. She cut out the article and kept it hidden in her Bible. The Iron Saints had indeed helped a domestic violence victim 12 months ago, a woman whose husband had connections with local police. They'd escorted her across state lines to a safe house, their leather vests and intimidating presence ensuring no one interfered. George hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Hadn't realized their one good deed had become someone else's last hope. "Tiana Campbell," George said softly, finally placing the name. "I know who your mother is, Gift, and we're going to help her. Promise?" Gift's eyes were enormous, pleading. Behind George, every member of the Iron Saints nodded. "Promise," George said. "Nobody hurts kids on our watch. Not anymore." Gift launched herself forward, wrapping her small arms around George's tattooed neck. He held her awkwardly, this tiny girl who weighed less than his Harley's saddlebags, and felt the weight of every failure that had led him to this moment. His sister. All the women he'd failed to protect. All the violence he'd caused instead of prevented. Maybe this was his chance to get it right. "Chains," George said quietly. "Get the evidence somewhere safe. Ratchet. Call Doc. I want him to check on Gift's feet. And somebody get this kid some food that isn't stale goldfish crackers." As the club mobilized around them, Gift pulled back and looked up at George with something like wonder. "Mommy was right," she whispered. "You are the good kind of scary." George didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and hoped to God he could live up to that 7-year-old's faith. Because Barnabas Campbell would be back. And next time, he wouldn't come asking. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil, old leather, and decades of cigarette smoke that no amount of cleaning could erase. A single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows across the scarred wooden table where George carefully laid out Gift's evidence. The little girl sat wrapped in Tiny's leather jacket, which hung on her like a blanket, eating a peanut butter sandwich that Chains had somehow managed to construct despite the clubhouse's barely functional kitchen. George held the flash drive between his fingers like it might explode. In a way, it could. Information was always more dangerous than weapons. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. "Gift," he said gently, "before I look at this, I need to know. Did your mom tell you what's on here?" Gift nodded, chewing carefully. "She said it's proof of Daddy's bad business, and proof of what he did to her. She said there's 3 kinds of proof. The business stuff that makes him go to jail for a long time, the hitting stuff that makes him lose me forever, and the—" She paused, searching for words. "The other bad stuff that makes sure nobody believes his lies anymore." 12 hardened bikers stood in silence, watching a 7-year-old explain evidence collection like a prosecutor. "She taught you all this?" Ratchet asked, his voice tight. "Mommy's smart." She was studying to be a paralegal before she married Daddy. She knows about evidence and discovery and chain of custody. Gift recited the legal terms with the careful pronunciation of a child who'd been drilled on important words. She said women like her don't get believed unless they have lots and lots of proof. So she collected it for 3 years. 3 years. George felt sick. This child had been living in a war zone for 3 years while her mother quietly built a case against the monster in their home. All right. George opened his laptop, an old, battered thing they used for club business, and plugged in the drive. Everyone gather round. Whatever's on here, we're all seeing it together. The folder structure was meticulous, organized by date and category. Arms deals, assault documentation, audio evidence, financial records, witness statements. Tiana Campbell had built a federal case from inside her own nightmare. George clicked on the first video file in Arms Deals. The screen filled with grainy footage shot from what looked like a phone hidden in a purse. Barnabas Campbell sat at a restaurant table with 3 men whose faces George recognized from FBI wanted posters. They were discussing shipping routes, weapons specifications, and payment terms for military-grade hardware being smuggled to militia groups in Africa. "Jesus Christ," Smoke whispered. "That's enough to get him 20 years just on arms trafficking." George's hand trembled slightly as he clicked the next file. Then the next. 8 videos total, each showing Barnabas conducting illegal weapons deals with criminals, terrorists, and corrupt military officials. The most recent was dated 2 weeks ago. "Mommy filmed them from her purse," Gift said quietly. "Daddy always made her come to his business dinners. He said it made him look respectable to have a pretty wife. She was scared the whole time, but she kept filming." The assault documentation folder was worse. Photos of Tiana's face, black eyes, split lips, bruises in the shape of fingers around her throat. Videos she'd recorded of herself, crying, documenting injuries and providing context. "Barnabas hit me 17 times tonight because dinner was cold. Gift is hiding in her closet. I can hear her crying. I'm so sorry, baby." George had to look away. Behind him, he heard chains punch the wall. But it was the audio files that broke something fundamental in that room. Tiana's voice, shaking but determined. "My name is Tiana Marie Campbell. It's March 15th, 2024. My husband, Barnabas Campbell, has threatened to kill me if I try to leave him. He has weapons hidden throughout the house. He has connections with law enforcement. I don't know if I'll survive this marriage, but if something happens to me, please protect my daughter. Gift. Please, don't let him have her. He's capable of anything." Another recording, more recent. "It's getting worse. He knows I know too much about his business. I think he's planning something. I've prepared everything for Gift. The evidence, the escape route, the safe people to run to. If you're hearing this, I'm probably already gone. Please, save my baby." The final recording was dated 2 days ago. Barnabas screaming, furniture breaking, Tiana pleading, and then, worst of all, Gift's small voice in the background crying, "Daddy, please stop! You're hurting Mommy!" George stopped the playback. The silence in the clubhouse was suffocating. "That was Tuesday," Gift said softly. "That's when Mommy told me to sleep with my shoes on and keep my bag ready. She said things were going to get really bad soon." George's mind was racing. Barnabas Campbell. The name had been nagging at him since he first heard it. He'd known a Barnabas Campbell once, years ago, before the club, before the ink and the bikes and the... His blood turned to ice. "Afghanistan," he said aloud. 2009. Forward operating base, Sharana. Chains looked at him sharply. George? I know him. George's voice was hollow. Barnabas Campbell. He was civilian contractor attached to our unit. Logistics and supply. He felt the old rage rising, the kind that had taken years of therapy to bury. He was selling our location to the enemy, selling them intel on our patrols, our weaknesses, our supply routes. The room went dead quiet. The ambush that killed Marcus, Danny, Rodriguez, and Hutch. That was him. That was Barnabas goddamn Campbell. George's fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. They court-martialed him, but he got off on a technicality. Insufficient evidence. He walked away while I buried half my unit. You're sure it's the same guy? Ratchet asked. I'd know that name in my sleep. George pulled up one of the videos again, pausing on Barnabas's face. Older now, harder, but unmistakable. That's him? That's the bastard who sold out American soldiers for profit. Gift was watching George with wide eyes. You knew my daddy? I knew what he was, George said, forcing himself to gentle his tone. I knew he was the kind of man who'd do anything for money, who'd hurt anyone, even the people who trusted him. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. Tiana must have realized who George was, must have seen the Iron Saint's connection to the military veteran community. She'd known that of all the people in the world, George Murray had a personal reason to make sure Barnabas Campbell faced justice. She'd been even smarter than he'd thought. So what do we do? Tiny asked. We've got enough evidence here to put him away forever. We take this to the FBI, the police, hell, the news media. And then what? Chains interrupted. Gift said it herself. Barnabas has connections with law enforcement. You saw those videos. He's got judges, cops, politicians in his pocket. We hand this over. It might disappear into evidence lockup and never see daylight. We can't just sit on it, Smoke argued. That's obstruction of justice. And we can't let that bastard walk free, Ratchet countered. Not after what he did to Tiana, not after what he did to George's unit. The argument was building, voices rising, old instincts warring with new convictions. The Iron Saints had spent years trying to stay on the right side of the law. But the law had failed Tiana Campbell. The law had failed George's brothers in Afghanistan. The law had failed Gift, who'd had to run barefoot through the night because no one else would protect her. Stop! George's voice cut through the noise. Everyone turned to look at him. He was staring at Gift, who sat small and frightened in a jacket 5 sizes too big, still clutching her peanut butter sandwich. We do this the right way, George said finally. But we do it smart. We make copies of everything, multiple copies. We send them to the FBI, the state police, news organizations, civil rights groups, military investigators. We flood the system so no one person can bury it. And if that doesn't work? Chains asked. George's jaw tightened. Then we make sure Barnabas Campbell understands what happens to men who hurt children and betray their brothers. It wasn't quite legal. It wasn't quite vigilante justice. It was somewhere in between, the gray area where men like the Iron Saints had learned to operate. I'll start making copies, Ratchet said, already reaching for the flash drive. I'll contact our lawyers, Tiny added, and that victim's advocate we worked with last year. I'll secure the compound, Chains said. He's coming back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. George looked down at Gift, who'd been listening to everything with an expression far too serious for a 7-year-old. Did we do good? She asked quietly. Is Mommy's proof going to work? George knelt down so he was eye level with her. Your mommy was the bravest person I've never met. And you, Gift Campbell, are just like her. What you did tonight, running here, bringing us this evidence, trusting us, that's going to save lives. Maybe your mom's life. Maybe other people your dad would have hurt. And maybe, he added, his voice dropping, it'll finally give some soldiers the justice they never got. Gift didn't understand that last part, but she nodded anyway. Then she did something that broke every heart in that room. She pulled a photograph from her bag, a picture of her and Tiana, both smiling, both wearing matching pink dresses. "Will you keep Mommy safe?" she asked. "Even if I can't?" George took the photograph with careful hands. "I promise, on my life and the lives of every man in this club, we will keep your mommy safe." It was a promise he intended to keep, even if it meant becoming the monster Barnabas Campbell had always accused them of being. The Campbell residence sat in an upscale neighborhood where the lawns were manicured and the neighbors minded their own business. It was the kind of place where screams went unheard and blood washed away before morning. Barnabas Campbell stood in his kitchen, staring at his hands. They were still covered in Tiana's blood, dried now, cracking between his knuckles. The fluorescent light above hummed like an accusation. On the floor, smears of red led from where he'd dragged his wife to the bedroom. She was still breathing. Barely, but alive enough to be a problem. "We need to leave, now." Marcus Chen, his business partner and fixer, paced near the doorway. The man was ex-CIA, efficient and cold, exactly the kind of associate Barnabas needed for his arms-dealing operation. "Every minute we stay here is another minute for that kid to talk. She's 7 years old," Barnabas snarled, pouring himself a whiskey with shaking hands. "Who's going to believe her?" "She has the flash drive, Barnabas. Everything we've worked for, client lists, transaction records, offshore accounts, it's all on there." Marcus's voice was dangerously calm. "You said it was secure. You said your wife didn't know about your office safe." Barnabas slammed the glass down, shattering it. "How was I supposed to know Tiana was smart enough to crack the combination? How was I supposed to know she'd been documenting everything for 3 goddamn years?" The truth was uglier than he wanted to admit. He'd underestimated his wife. He'd thought the beatings kept her compliant, thought the threats kept her silent, thought the isolation kept her powerless. Instead, she'd been building a case against him, one photograph and recording at a time, and she'd trained their daughter to be her contingency plan. "The bikers have her," Marcus said. "The Iron Saints. I did some quick research while you were," he gestured vaguely at the blood, "handling your domestic situation. They're not just some motorcycle club. Their president, George Murray, is former military, special forces. He has connections with federal investigators and victims' advocacy groups." Something flickered in Barnabas's memory. "George Murray. Why do I know that name?" "Afghanistan, 2009. You sold intel to the Taliban that got half his unit killed." Marcus's expression was unreadable. "He testified at your court-martial." The whiskey turned to acid in Barnabas's throat. Of all the people in the world Gift could have run to, she'd found the one man with a personal vendetta against him. Tiana must have planned that too. The clever bitch. "So he knows who I am," Barnabas said slowly. "He knows what I've done, and he has evidence that could put me away for life. Which is why we need to disappear. I have a plane fueled and waiting. We can be in Mexico by dawn, South America by tomorrow night." "No," Barnabas's voice went cold, deadly. "I'm not running. Not from some has-been soldier and his biker trash. And I'm not leaving loose ends." Marcus stared at him. "You're talking about killing your own daughter." "I'm talking about protecting our operation. Gift is a witness. She's seen things, heard things. Even without the flash drive, she's a liability. Barnabas pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I'm calling in the crew, all of them. If the Iron Saints want a war, we'll give them one. You're making a mistake, Marcus warned. These aren't civilians. They're trained fighters with nothing to lose and a moral justification to kill you. Barnabas smiled without humor. Then, I guess we'll see who wants it more. He started making calls. Gift's scream shattered the pre-dawn quiet like broken glass. George was on his feet instantly, years of military training overriding exhaustion. He'd been dozing in a chair outside the room where they'd put Gift to sleep. A small storage area they'd hastily converted with a cot and some blankets. Now he burst through the door to find her sitting bolt upright, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with sobs. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up! Please, wake up!" "Gift, hey, hey!" George approached slowly, hands visible, voice gentle. "You're safe. You're at the compound. Remember, with the bikers." But Gift wasn't seeing him. She was seeing whatever horror played behind her closed eyelids when she slept. There's so much blood. Daddy keeps hitting her. Why won't she wake up? The other bikers crowded in the doorway, looking as helpless as men their size could look. Chains, who'd fought in 3 wars, stood frozen. Ratchet, who could rebuild an engine blindfolded, fumbled with his hands. Tiny, the youngest, looked like he might cry himself. "Somebody do something," George hissed. I could make hot chocolate?" Smoke offered weakly. "Kids like hot chocolate, right?" "She's having a nightmare, not a tea party," Chains muttered, but he was already moving. "I'll get it." George sat on the edge of the cot, maintaining a careful distance. "Gift, look at me. Can you look at me?" When her wild eyes finally focused on his face, he continued. "You're safe. Your daddy's not here. The bag is secure. Everything your mommy gave you is protected." Gift's breathing slowed fractionally. "I dreamed Daddy found us. I dreamed he hurt you like he hurt Mommy." "Nobody's hurting anybody," George promised. "You see all these guys?" He gestured to the awkward collection of bikers crowding the doorway. "They're the scariest people in 3 counties, and they're all here to make sure you stay safe." Chains returned with a mug of hot chocolate so covered in whipped cream it looked like a science experiment. "Here, kid, it's got extra marshmallows. And, he pulled out a candy bar. Some chocolate, for the chocolate." Despite everything, Gift almost smiled. She took the mug with both hands, sipping carefully. Ratchet cleared his throat. "Your hair's all messed up from sleeping. Want me to fix it?" "I used to braid my daughter's hair before." He stopped abruptly. They all knew what came after before. Before the divorce. Before he lost custody. Before he joined the club to escape the pain of being a father who couldn't see his kid. "You have a daughter?" Gift asked quietly. Have. It's complicated." Ratchet sat cross-legged on the floor, surprisingly graceful for a man his size. "But I remember how to do braids. Turn around." Gift obeyed, and soon Ratchet's oil-stained hands were awkwardly working through her natural curls, trying to remember the patterns his daughter had taught him years ago. He fumbled, started over, fumbled again. Tiny wordlessly handed him a hair tie. The scene was absurd. A 7-year-old girl getting her hair braided by a biker at 4 in the morning while drinking hot chocolate and being guarded by a motorcycle club. But somehow, it was working. Gift's breathing steadied. Her tears stopped. The nightmare's grip loosened. "My mommy does 2 braids," Gift said softly. "1 on each side." 2 braids, got it. Ratchet divided her hair carefully. Your mommy's got good taste. That's when the police scanner crackled to life from the main room. Chains had left it on. They always monitored local emergency channels. The dispatcher's voice cut through the moment like a blade. All units, structure fire at 4782 Oakmont Drive. Repeat, residential fire with possible victim inside. Paramedics en route. Gift's entire body went rigid. The mug slipped from her hands. Hot chocolate splashing across the floor. That's my house, she whispered. Then louder, panicked. That's my address. Mommy's still there. Mommy's in the fire. She tried to bolt, but George caught her. Gift, wait! He's killing her, Gift screamed, fighting against his hold with surprising strength. He's burning down the house with Mommy inside. We have to go. We have to save her. The bikers exploded into motion. Chains was already grabbing his keys. Ratchet abandoned the half-finished braid to pull on his boots. Smoke ran for the garage. George held Gift's face in his hands. Listen to me. You stay here with Tiny. We're going to get your mom. Do you understand? We're going right now to get her out. Promise? I swear it. George was already moving toward the door. Tiny, lock everything down. Nobody in or out except us. If Barnabas shows up here, he won't get past the gate, Tiny promised, pulling Gift into a protective hold. The garage erupted with the roar of 12 Harleys firing up simultaneously. George threw his leg over his bike, the engine vibrating beneath him like a living thing. Through the open door, he could see the first hints of orange on the horizon. Not sunrise, but flames. Barnabas Campbell had made his move. Roll out! George's voice cut through the engine noise. And somebody call 911. Tell them there's a victim inside that needs immediate extraction. The Iron Saints thundered out of the compound in formation, leather and chrome and barely controlled rage. They weren't just riding toward a fire. They were riding toward war. Behind them, Gift stood at the gate with Tiny, watching them disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. She clutched her pink bag to her chest, the bag that held all her mother's hopes and all her mother's pain. Please save Mommy, she whispered to the empty road. Please let the men with leather jackets be heroes. In the distance, smoke rose like a prayer into the morning sky. And somewhere in that fire, Tiana Campbell waited to be saved or to die. The Campbell residence was a vision of hell. George saw the flames from 3 blocks away, orange and red licking at the night sky, thick black smoke billowing upward like a funeral shroud. Even over the roar of 12 Harley engines, he could hear the hungry crackle of burning wood, the explosive pop of windows shattering from heat. The Iron Saints came screaming around the corner in tight formation, their headlights cutting through the smoke-choked street. Neighbors stood on their pristine lawns in bathrobes and shock, phones pressed to their ears, watching a woman burn to death while they waited for someone else to be heroic. George didn't slow down. He didn't wait for permission. He drove his bike straight across the Campbell's front lawn, killing the engine as he dismounted in one fluid motion. Chains! Ratchet with me! Smoke, crowd control! Nobody interferes! George was already pulling off his leather vest, wrapping it around his arm. Tiny radioed that the fire started 15 minutes ago. If she's still alive, she doesn't have long. The front of the house was completely engulfed, flames shooting from every window. The heat was intense even from 20 feet away, like standing too close to a furnace. George could feel his skin tightening. his lungs protesting with each breath of superheated air. "Side entrance!" Chains shouted, pointing to a gate leading to the backyard. "If she's anywhere, she's trying to get out the back." They vaulted the fence as one unit, years of military training overriding basic survival instincts that screamed to run away from the inferno. The backyard was a maze of smoke and shadows. The pool glowed orange with reflected flames. Lawn furniture melted into abstract sculptures. And there, collapsed halfway out the back door, like she'd been trying to crawl to safety, was Tiana Campbell. She was barely recognizable. Blood matted her hair, old blood from earlier, mixed with fresh burns. Her nightgown had burned away in places, revealing skin that was blistered and raw. But her chest moved. Shallow, labored breaths that could stop any second. "She's alive!" George dropped to his knees beside her, checking for a pulse, weak but present. "Tiana, can you hear me? We're here to help." No response. She was deeply unconscious, probably from smoke inhalation or blood loss or both. Behind them, a massive beam collapsed inside the house, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. The structure was failing. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "I've got her!" Chains, the biggest of them all, scooped Tiana up as gently as his scarred hands could manage. She was limp in his arms, a broken doll. "Move!" They ran. The world narrowed to pure survival. The pounding of boots on grass, the roar of flames behind them, the desperate need to get clear before the house became a tomb. George's lungs burned. His eyes watered from the smoke. But he kept moving, kept running. Because that's what you did when someone's life depended on it. They cleared the fence just as the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. The sound was apocalyptic. Tons of burning wood and tile imploding inward, sending a pillar of fire and embers erupting skyward. The shockwave of heat knocked them forward. George felt the hair on the back of his neck singe. But they were out. They were alive. "Get her on the grass, away from the house!" George was already checking Tiana's breathing, his battlefield first aid training coming back in a rush. Airway, partially obstructed by smoke damage. Breathing, shallow and irregular. Circulation, pulse thready but persistent. Chains laid her down carefully on a neighbor's lawn, far enough from the fire to be safe. Ratchet was already on his phone with 911, giving their location and demanding immediate paramedic response. That's when George heard it. The sound that would haunt him forever. The scream of a child who'd just seen her worst nightmare confirmed. He turned to see Gift running toward them, Tiny sprinting behind her, unable to catch the terrified 7-year-old. She must have demanded he bring her, must have threatened or pleaded until he gave in. And now she was seeing her mother's burned and bleeding body laid out on the grass like a corpse. "Mommy!" Gift's voice tore through the night. "Mommy, wake up!" She threw herself down beside Tiana, her small hands hovering over her mother's body, not knowing where it was safe to touch. "Mommy, please, please wake up. I got help. I found the men with leather jackets." "Please, don't leave me." George caught her before she could shake Tiana's injuries worse. "Gift, listen to me. Your mom is alive, do you hear me? She's breathing, but we need to let the paramedics help her." "She's all burned," Gift sobbed. "Daddy burned her. He tried to kill her." "But he didn't," George said firmly, holding the girl's face so she had to look at him instead of her mother's injuries. "You saved her, Gift. You ran to us. You brought the evidence. You gave us time to get here before it was too late. Your mommy is alive because of you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The cavalry was finally arriving, fire trucks, ambulances, police. But the Iron Saints had gotten there first. They'd done what the system couldn't. They'd acted immediately. Consequences be damned. Gift collapsed against George, her small body racked with sobs. He held her awkwardly, this crying child covered in soot and terror, while behind them, the Campbell house burned like a funeral pyre for the life Tiana had tried so hard to escape. That's when George saw it. A car parked half a block away, engine idling, headlights off. In the driver's seat, barely visible through the smoke and darkness, a figure watched. Even from this distance, George could feel the weight of that stare. Barnabas Campbell. Their eyes met across the chaos. George saw the moment Barnabas realized his plan had failed. That Tiana was alive. That witnesses surrounded her. That his chance to eliminate the evidence had literally gone up in smoke. For a long moment, neither moved. It was a standoff written in violence and vengeance. George's hand instinctively moved toward his belt, where he'd once carried a sidearm. Barnabas's hand did the same. But then the sirens got louder, the flashing lights visible now around the corner. And Barnabas made his choice. The car surged forward, tires squealing, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness before anyone else could see him. "That was him," Chains said quietly, materializing beside George. He was watching, making sure she died. "And now he knows she didn't," George replied. His voice was cold, calculated. "Which means he's going to try again." The ambulance screeched to a halt, paramedics spilling out with equipment and urgency. They descended on Tiana with professional efficiency, oxygen mask, IV line, backboard. Gift tried to follow as they loaded her mother into the ambulance, but George held her back. "You can ride with me," he told her. "We'll follow them to the hospital. I promise you won't leave your mom's side." "Promise?" Gift's voice was so small, so broken. "On my life." The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. George sat with Gift curled up in his lap, exhausted from crying, still clutching her pink bag. The other Iron Saints spread throughout the room like leather-clad sentinels, refusing to leave despite the nurses' protests. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was carefully neutral. "Family of Tiana Campbell?" George stood, Gift still in his arms. "We're her protection detail. This is her daughter." The doctor looked at them, a biker holding a child, surrounded by more bikers, all covered in soot and determination. To his credit, he didn't argue. "She's stable. Second-degree burns on approximately 15% of her body, severe smoke inhalation, and significant head trauma from the earlier assault. But she's breathing on her own and responsive to pain stimuli. She's a fighter." Gift started crying again, but this time from relief. "Can we see her?" George asked. "ICU, 2 visitors at a time." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "You got there fast. Another 5 minutes, and we'd be having a very different conversation." They let Gift in with George. The ICU was cold and sterile, full of beeping machines and the quiet suffering of people clinging to life. Tiana lay in the bed, small and fragile beneath white sheets. Her face was bandaged. Burns covered her arms, but her chest rose and fell with steady determination. Gift climbed onto the chair beside the bed, taking her mother's hand carefully. "I'm here, Mommy. I found the good, scary people just like you said, and they saved you." George stood at the window, watching the sun rise over a city that had failed this family at every turn. Behind him, through the open door, he could see Chains and the others standing guard. They looked like what they were, hard men ready for violence. He thought about Barnabas Campbell, somewhere out there, regrouping and planning his next move. He thought about the evidence they'd copied and distributed to every authority they could think of. He thought about the choice he'd made years ago to become something better than what he'd been. And he thought about Gift, 7 years old, with scraped knees and braided hair, sitting vigil over her warrior mother. "No one hurts a child on my watch again," George whispered to his reflection. It was a vow made to himself, to his dead sister, to the brothers he'd lost in Afghanistan, and to every person he'd failed to protect when it mattered. This time would be different. This time, the monsters would lose. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside this ICU room, surrounded by bikers who'd become guardians, a little girl held her mother's hand and believed, maybe for the first time, that heroes were real. By noon, the Iron Saints were famous. News vans crowded the hospital parking lot. Cameras pointed at every entrance, reporters breathlessly recounting the story of motorcycle club members who'd rushed into a burning building to save a domestic violence victim. Local stations ran it every hour. Social media exploded with shares and comments. Suddenly, the scary men with leather jackets were heroes. George hated every second of it. He sat in a hospital conference room across from Detective Sarah Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been working domestic violence cases longer than most of the Iron Saints had been riding. She'd questioned him for 2 hours, taking notes, recording everything, her expression giving nothing away. "So you just happened to be monitoring police scanners at 4 in the morning, Walsh said, not quite making it a question. "We always monitor scanners," George replied evenly. "We run security for events. We escort vulnerable people. We need to know what's happening in our area. And you just happen to know where Tiana Campbell lived. Her daughter told us, the one who ran to our compound for help." George met her eyes without flinching. The 7-year-old who watched her father beat her mother unconscious. "That ring a bell, Detective?" Walsh's jaw tightened. She'd seen the preliminary medical reports. She knew what Barnabas had done. "We've been building a case against Barnabas Campbell for months. Domestic violence, illegal arms dealing, money laundering. But victims keep recanting. Evidence keeps disappearing. It's like he has eyes everywhere." "Because he does," George said quietly. "Ask yourself why a man can beat his wife for years and never spend a night in jail. Ask yourself, who's protecting him?" Walsh's pen stopped moving. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious problem." George leaned forward. "Tiana Campbell spent 3 years documenting abuse because she knew no one would believe her otherwise. She taught her 7-year-old daughter to collect evidence and run for help. What does that tell you about the system?" The detective was silent for a long moment. Then she closed her notebook. "You're free to go, Mr. Murray, but stay available. This investigation is far from over." "Neither is Barnabas Campbell," George said as he stood. "He tried to kill his wife last night. He'll try again, and next time he might succeed." Walsh didn't disagree. Tiana regained consciousness that afternoon. George was there when her eyes fluttered open, Gift asleep in the chair beside her, still holding her mother's bandaged hand. For a moment, Tiana just stared at the ceiling, processing pain and survival, and the fact that she was still breathing. Then her eyes found George, and she knew. "You're George Murray," she whispered, her voice raw from smoke damage. "The Iron Saints." "Ma'am?" He moved closer but kept his distance, aware of what trauma did to trust. Your daughter brought us evidence. We got you out of the fire. You're safe now. Tears slid down Tiana's burned cheeks. Gift. Is she? Right here. Asleep. She hasn't left your side. George gestured to the small figure curled in the chair. She's the bravest kid I've ever met. Tiana's hand tightened on her daughter's fingers. The flash drive. Did you? We copied everything. Sent it to the FBI, state police, military investigators, journalists. Whatever Barnabas had on there, it's out now. He can't bury it. Good. Tiana's eyes closed briefly. But that's not everything. I made other copies, hid them in 3 locations, my sister's house in Ohio, a safety deposit box at First National, and with my lawyer. Different files, different evidence. I knew if Barnabas found one, he'd stop looking for the others. George felt a surge of respect. This woman had been playing chess while her husband thought they were playing checkers. Smart? Paranoid, Tiana corrected weakly. But when you're married to a monster, paranoia keeps you alive. Her eyes opened again, focusing on him with sudden intensity. He's going to come after her. After Gift. She's the only witness who can testify about what he did. If he eliminates her, he won't, George said flatly. We won't let him near her. He has people, not just criminals, cops, judges, people with badges who owe him favors. Tiana's breathing quickened, the monitors beeping faster. That's why I sent Gift to you, because the system failed me. Because men with badges looked the other way every time I called for help. Because you were my last hope. George felt the weight of that trust like a physical thing. We won't let you down. Tiana studied his face. The scars, the tattoos, the hard lines of a man who'd seen too much violence. You knew him, Barnabas. I can see it in your eyes. Afghanistan, George confirmed. He sold out my unit, got half my brothers killed. The army couldn't make the charges stick. Then you want him dead as much as I do. No, ma'am. George's voice was quiet, but firm. I want him in prison. I want him to lose everything. His freedom, his reputation, his power. I want him to spend the rest of his life knowing he lost to the woman he tried to break. Tiana smiled, though it clearly hurt. The good kind of scary. I chose right. The Iron Saints compound. Evening. The mood at the compound was toxic. George walked in to find his brothers in 3 separate groups, voices raised, accusations flying. The rescue had made them heroes, but it had also painted a target on their backs. Now they were waiting for Barnabas to retaliate, and the pressure was cracking their unity. I'm telling you, someone told him we had the girl. Smoke jabbed a finger at Chains. How else did he know to show up here within an hour of her arriving? You calling me a rat? Chains moved forward, his bulk intimidating. I've bled for this club. I've done time for this club. Don't you dare. Enough. George's voice cut through the chaos. We're not doing this. We're not turning on each other. Then explain how Barnabas knew, Ratchet demanded. He showed up at our gate with 3 cars and armed men. Nobody just stumbles onto this location. Someone told him. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. George wanted to deny it, wanted to believe his brothers were solid, but he'd been in enough combat situations to know there was always someone who broke under pressure. We'll figure it out, he said carefully, but not by tearing each other apart. Barnabas wants us divided. Don't give him what he wants. The tension didn't dissipate, but the immediate threat of violence receded. The brothers dispersed to different corners of the compound, watching each other with new suspicion. George found Gift in the garage, sitting beside his Harley, drawing pictures with crayons someone had bought her. She looked up when he approached, her expression troubled. "They're fighting," she said quietly. "The bikers. They're mad at each other." "Yeah, baby girl. Things are complicated right now." George sat down beside her, his back against the motorcycle. "But we'll work it out." Gift was quiet for a moment, adding careful details to her drawing. A house on fire, stick figures running, a little girl holding a bag. "George? Yeah?" "Reaper." She said the name hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she should. "He's been acting weird." George went very still. "Weird how?" "He doesn't look at me. Everyone else talks to me and smiles, but Reaper looks away, like he's scared or sad or something." Gift put down her crayon. "And I heard him on the phone yesterday. He was outside by the fence, and he was crying. He said, 'I didn't know there'd be a kid.' I swear I didn't know." The world tilted sideways. Reaper. Marcus Reaper Stone, former Marine, been with the club for 8 years, always reliable, always loyal. George had trusted him with his life a dozen times over. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" George kept his voice level, but his mind was racing. Gift nodded. "I was in the bathroom. The window was open. He didn't know I could hear." George stood slowly, his heart pounding. He wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe there was another explanation. But Gift had no reason to lie. And more importantly, her observation explained everything. How Barnabas had found them so fast, how he'd known exactly where to look. Loyalty versus justice. The oldest war in any brotherhood. "Gift, I need you to do something for me." George knelt down to her eye level. "I need you to stay here in the garage with your drawings. Don't come out until I come to get you, okay? No matter what you hear." Her eyes widened. "Are you going to hurt Reaper?" "I'm going to talk to him," George said, which wasn't exactly a lie. "But I need you safe first." Gift bit her lip, then nodded. "Okay, but George, if he did something bad, maybe he's sorry. Maybe he needs the good kind of scary to help him, too." Out of the mouths of children. George found Reaper in the workshop, supposedly fixing a carburetor but mostly just staring at it. When George walked in and locked the door behind him, Reaper's shoulders tensed. "We need to talk," George said quietly. Reaper didn't look up. "Yeah, I figured we would eventually." "How much did he pay you?" The question hung in the air. For a long moment, George thought Reaper might deny it, might fight, might make this harder than it needed to be. Instead, he just deflated. $5,000. He said he just wanted to know if anyone had seen his daughter. Said she'd run away, and he was worried sick. Reaper's hands shook. "I didn't know, George. I swear I didn't know what he was, what he'd done. I thought I was helping a father find his kid. And when you saw the bruises, the terror, the evidence, by then it was too late." Reaper finally looked up, and his eyes were haunted. "I tried to tell myself I'd been tricked, that it wasn't my fault, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. And I said nothing." George stood there, staring at a man he'd called brother, feeling the weight of every choice they'd both made that led to this moment. "You betrayed us," George said flatly. "You betrayed that little girl. For $5,000. "I know." Reaper's voice cracked. "I'll turn myself in. I'll testify against Barnabas. I'll do whatever you want. But George? He looked up, desperate. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Sorry didn't bring back the dead. Sorry didn't erase betrayal. But maybe, George thought, remembering Gift's words, sorry was where redemption started. Pack your things, George said finally. You've got 1 hour. Then you're gone. What about the club? What about... You're out. Effective immediately. You keep your mouth shut about our business, and we keep ours shut about yours. George's voice was ice. But if I ever see you again, if you ever come near Gift or Tiana, if you ever wear those colors anywhere in this state. He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. Reaper nodded, broken. For what it's worth, that kid's special. Protect her. She's worth more than all of us combined. George didn't disagree. An hour later, Reaper's bike disappeared down the highway, and the Iron Saints were 11 instead of 12. George told the others what had happened. Gift's observation, Reaper's confession, the betrayal that had nearly gotten them all killed. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Chains asked, "What do we do now?" George looked toward the garage, where a 7-year-old girl waited with her crayons and her faith in the good kind of scary. "Now," he said quietly, "we finish what we started. We make sure Barnabas Campbell pays for everything he's done, and we prove that Reaper was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "That we're worth protecting too." George called church. In the Iron Saints, church meant one thing, a mandatory meeting of all patched members, no exceptions, no excuses. It was where they voted on new prospects, settled disputes, and made decisions that affected the entire club. It was sacred ground, even for men who didn't believe in much that was sacred anymore. The clubhouse main room filled quickly. Chains, Smoke, Ratchet, Tiny, all the brothers who'd risked their lives for a little girl they didn't know. They sensed something was wrong. The air felt charged, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. Reaper entered last, his cut already removed, folded over his arm. He knew what was coming. George had given him the option to leave quietly, but Reaper had refused. "They deserve to know," he'd said, "and I deserve to face them." There was honor in that, at least. Gift sat in the corner on a bar stool, her legs swinging nervously. George had wanted to send her away for this, but she'd insisted. "I'm part of this," she'd said with that 7-year-old wisdom that kept breaking his heart. "Mommy always said you face the consequences of telling the truth, even when it's scary." So she stayed, clutching her pink bag, watching with wide eyes, as 11 bikers formed a semicircle around one. George stood in the center, arms crossed. "Brothers, we've got a problem. Someone leaked our location to Barnabas Campbell. Someone told him a 7-year-old girl was here asking for protection." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Who?" Chains's voice was deadly quiet. George looked at Reaper. "You want to tell them, or should I?" Reaper stepped forward, his jaw tight. For a man about to confess treason, he held himself with surprising dignity. "It was me. Barnabas approached me 3 days ago at the gas station on Route 9. Offered me $5,000 to call him if anyone came around asking about domestic violence or looking for protection from him." The explosion was immediate. Smoke lunged forward, but Tiny caught him. Chains's fists clenched white-knuckled at his sides. Ratchet turned away, unable to even look at the traitor. "You sold us out for $5,000?" Smoke's voice shook with rage. "You let that bastard know where to find a terrified kid?" "I didn't know," Reaper's composure cracked. He told me his daughter had run away, said he was worried sick, that his ex-wife had been filling the kid's head with lies. He showed me a photo. Gift looked happy in it, smiling. How was I supposed to know he was lying? Because you knew us, Chains roared, breaking free from the restraining hands. You knew we don't protect kids from good fathers. You knew if someone ran to us, there was a damn good reason. I needed the money, Reaper said, and now the shame was visible, eating him alive. My ex-wife, she's sick. Cancer. The bills. I couldn't keep up. I thought it was just information. You thought $5,000 was worth more than a child's life, George interrupted quietly. The words fell like stones. Reaper had no answer for that. The brothers were vibrating with barely restrained violence. These were men who'd killed before, who'd settled scores with blood, who lived by a code that said betrayal was the worst sin. In some clubs, Reaper would already be dead. In some clubs, they'd have beaten him until he couldn't walk and left him in a ditch. But George had promised himself he was building something different. Chains, smoke, stand down. George's voice had that combat-hardened authority that made men obey even when they didn't want to. Nobody touches him. George, he betrayed the club, Smoke protested. And he'll answer for it, but not like this. George walked to where Gift sat, gently taking her pink bag from her hands. She let him, trusting, even though confusion clouded her eyes. George crossed to Reaper and held out the bag. Take it. Reaper stared at the bag like it might bite him. What? Take it. Hold it. Feel how heavy it is. Slowly, reluctantly, Reaper took the bag. It sagged in his hands, heavier than it looked, full of a child's desperate treasures. You know what's in there? George asked quietly. Evidence. 3 years of evidence collected by a woman who knew no one would believe her without proof. Photos of her own broken face. Recordings of her own screams. A flash drive full of the crimes of a man who beat her unconscious and tried to burn her alive. Reaper's hands trembled. That bag, George continued, his voice soft but relentless, was packed by a mother who knew she might die, who taught her 7-year-old daughter to collect evidence like a detective, to run barefoot through the night, to trust strangers wearing leather vests, because the people who should have protected her, the cops, the courts, the system, had all failed. Tears tracked down Reaper's face. George stepped closer. You didn't betray me, Marcus. You didn't betray the Iron Saints, or the club, or some abstract code of brotherhood. He placed his hand on the pink bag. You betrayed her. That little girl sitting right there who trusted us because she had no one else. You sold her location to her father, the man who tried to kill her mother, for $5,000. The clubhouse was silent, except for Reaper's ragged breathing. I'm sorry, Reaper whispered, looking past George to where Gift sat. I'm so sorry. Gift didn't respond. She just watched him with those old eyes, too young to understand betrayal in its complexity, but old enough to recognize it when she saw it. Sorry doesn't fix it, George said, but it's a start. He took the bag back, returning it to Gift. You're out, Marcus. Effective immediately. Turn in your cut, your club property, everything. You don't wear our colors. You don't use our name. You don't come near anyone under our protection. George? Reaper started. I'm not finished. George's voice hardened. You're out of the club, but you're not off the hook. You're going to testify against Barnabas, against anyone who helped him, against any cop or official who looked the other way. You're going to stand in front of a judge and tell the truth about everything you know." "They'll kill me," Reaper said flatly. "Barnabas has people everywhere. The moment I testify, then you better make sure your testimony puts him away forever," Chains growled. "Because if he walks, and you're still breathing, we're going to have another conversation." Reaper nodded slowly. He looked around the room at faces that had once been his brothers, now hardened against him. "For what it's worth, I hope you destroy him. I hope Gift gets her mother back, and I hope," his voice broke, "I hope someday she understands I never meant for her to get hurt." "Get out," George said quietly. Reaper laid his cut on the bar, the leather vest that had marked him as an Iron Saint, now just empty leather and broken promises. He walked toward the door, each step heavy with shame. As he reached the threshold, Gift's small voice stopped him. "Mr. Reaper?" He turned, tears still streaming down his face. "Mommy says everyone makes mistakes," Gift said carefully. "But grown-ups have to fix their mistakes, not just say sorry." Reaper nodded, unable to speak. Then he walked out into the night, no longer a brother, no longer trusted, carrying the weight of his betrayal like chains. The door closed behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Tiny's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "George, we've got intel." "From who?" "That detective, Walsh. She just texted. Anonymous tip came in." Tiny turned the phone around. "Barnabas Campbell, meeting his contacts at the old Riverside warehouse complex. Tonight at midnight. Word is he's fleeing the country." George checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. They had just over an hour. The brothers looked at each other. No words were needed. They'd been waiting for this. The moment when all the fear and evidence and running would finally come to an end. The moment they'd either stop Barnabas Campbell or die trying. "Gear up," George said quietly. "Full protection. This isn't a rescue mission. This is war," Chains finished. "No," George shook his head. "This is justice. There's a difference." He turned to Gift, who was watching everything with that same unsettling calm. "Baby girl, you're staying here with—" "I want to come," Gift interrupted. "Absolutely not. He's my daddy." Gift's voice was firm. "He hurt my mommy. He tried to kill her. I should be there when you stop him." "Gift, it's going to be dangerous. There might be shooting, fighting." "I've seen shooting and fighting my whole life," Gift said quietly. "At least this time it's for something good." George looked into those 7-year-old eyes and saw something that made him ache. Resignation. This child had lived through more violence than most soldiers. She'd collected evidence of her own mother's abuse. She'd run through the night clutching proof of her father's crimes. She'd earned the right to see how her story ended. "You stay in the truck," George said finally. "Doors locked. Head down. You don't come out until I say it's safe. Deal? Deal?" The Iron Saints moved as one organism, checking weapons, pulling on reinforced vests, mounting bikes that rumbled like controlled thunder. The garage doors opened to reveal a clear night sky, studded with indifferent stars. George looked at his brothers, 10 men instead of 12, but somehow stronger for the loss. They'd been tested by betrayal and found their core, protection of the innocent, no matter the cost. "This isn't about revenge," George said, his voice carrying over the idling engines. "This is about making sure a little girl can grow up without fear. Making sure a woman can breathe without checking over her shoulder. Making sure a monster finally faces consequences. "And if Barnabas doesn't want to come quietly?" Smoke asked. George's smile was cold. "Then we show him what happens when you hurt children. We show him that the men with leather jackets and big hearts also have iron fists." He looked at Gift, secure in the truck with Tiny. She pressed her hand against the window, small, trusting, believing. "Roll out," George commanded. 10 Harleys roared to life in perfect synchronization. The sound was apocalyptic, a promise and a threat wrapped in chrome and leather. The Iron Saints rode out into the night, not as criminals or outlaws or vigilantes. They rode out as a family going to war for one of their own. And God help anyone who stood in their way. The Iron Saints didn't ride to the warehouse. They rode to war. 10 motorcycles in tight formation, engines synchronized in a thunderous chorus that echoed off the sleeping city streets. George led the pack, his Harley cutting through the night like a blade. Behind him, Chains and Ratchet flanked left and right. Behind them, the rest of the brothers formed a V formation, leather and chrome, and barely contained violence. They'd dropped Gift at the hospital first. She'd fought it, argued, pleaded to witness her father's reckoning, but George had been firm. "You've seen enough violence for one lifetime. Let us handle this part." Tiana, still weak but conscious, had pulled her daughter close and whispered something George couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Gift had nodded and finally agreed to stay. As they left, George looked back to see mother and daughter framed in the hospital window, silhouetted against the fluorescent lights, a portrait of survival. Now, as the warehouse district came into view, George felt the old combat instincts kick in. The sharpening of senses, the slowing of time, the calculation of angles and cover, and how many seconds it would take to cross an open space. He'd sworn he was done with this. Done with violence, done with war, done with becoming the monster that haunted his nightmares. But some monsters needed to be stopped, and sometimes the only language they understood was force. The Riverside warehouse complex loomed ahead, a sprawling graveyard of industrial decay. Rusted shipping containers stacked like coffins, broken windows like empty eye sockets. And in the center, a single warehouse with lights blazing and expensive cars parked outside. George raised his fist. The formation stopped a quarter-mile out, engines idling. "Smoke, Tiny. Take the north entrance. Ratchet, Chains, south. Rest of you with me through the front." George's voice was calm, tactical. "We go in quiet if we can, loud if we must. Nobody fires unless fired upon. This is about apprehension, not execution." "And if Barnabas doesn't feel like being apprehended?" Chains asked. George's expression was granite. "Then we make sure he doesn't walk out of there to hurt anyone else." They killed their engines 100 yards out and advanced on foot. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of water lapping against dock pilings and muffled voices from inside the warehouse. Through a grimy window, George could see them. Barnabas Campbell, flanked by 6 armed men. Professional security, not street thugs. They surrounded a table covered in passports, cash, and documents. An escape plan in its final stages. Marcus Chen, Barnabas's fixer, gestured urgently. Even from outside, George could read the body language. Time to go. Now. But Barnabas was arguing, his face flushed with rage and alcohol. His hand kept moving to his waistband where a pistol bulged. He was unstable, unpredictable, the most dangerous kind of opponent. George signaled his brothers into position. Smoke and Tiny crept toward the north entrance. Chains and Ratchet disappeared around the south side. The remaining bikers spread out, covering exits and angles. George checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. At midnight, everything would change. He counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. The Iron Saints hit all three entrances simultaneously. "Barnabas Campbell!" George's voice boomed through the warehouse. "Federal warrants have been issued for your arrest. Arms trafficking, domestic violence, attempted murder. You're done running." For one frozen moment, nobody moved. Barnabas stared at the bikers flooding his escape route, recognition and hatred warring on his face. "You," he breathed, locking eyes with George. "Murray. You just couldn't let it go, could you? Couldn't let the past stay buried." "You buried my brothers," George said quietly, "and you tried to bury your wife and daughter. That kind of debt comes due eventually." Marcus Chen was already moving, hands raised. "Gentlemen, nobody needs to die tonight. We can discuss." The first gunshot shattered his words. One of Barnabas's guards fired at Chains. The bullet pinged off a support beam, and suddenly the warehouse erupted into chaos. The guards opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like violent stars. The bikers scattered for cover, returning fire with the disciplined precision of men who had been in firefights before. George dove behind a shipping container as bullets stitched a line across the concrete where he'd been standing. His ears rang from the gunfire. Smoke filled the air, from weapons, from ricochets sparking off metal. "Chains! Status!" George shouted. "Good! Guard down on the south side." "Ratchet? 2 more taking cover behind the trucks, moving to flank." This was war. Not the sanitized version civilians imagined, but the ugly reality. Confusion and fear and split-second decisions between living and dying. George spotted Barnabas trying to slip out a side door, briefcase in hand. He was running, leaving his men to die while he escaped. The coward's choice. Not this time. George broke from cover, sprinting across open ground as bullets whined past his head. 30 yards, 20, 10. He hit Barnabas like a linebacker, driving him into the ground. The briefcase flew open, scattering passports and cash across the oil-stained concrete. Barnabas tried to bring his pistol around, but George caught his wrist, slamming it against the ground once, twice, until the weapon skittered away. They grappled. 2 men who'd destroyed each other's lives, finally face to face. "You killed my brothers!" George's fist connected with Barnabas's jaw. "They were soldiers!" Barnabas spit blood. "Expendable! They were men with families." Another punch. "With kids who grew up without fathers. Like my daughter?" Barnabas laughed, manic. "You turned her against me! You and that bitch wife!" George's hand closed around Barnabas's throat. Don't you dare talk about them!" Behind them, the firefight was winding down. George heard his brothers' voices calling clear, reporting guards down or surrendered. But all he could focus on was the man beneath him. The monster who'd sold out soldiers, who'd beaten his wife for years, who'd tried to burn her alive. It would be so easy. Just apply pressure. Just squeeze until the light left those hateful eyes. "Do it," Barnabas wheezed. "Kill me. Prove you're just as bad as they say." George's hand trembled. This was the moment. The choice that defined everything. Become the monster, or prove he'd truly changed. He thought of Gift, watching from the hospital window. He thought of Tiana, who'd survived because she was smarter and braver than her abuser. He thought of his brothers, the ones he'd lost in Afghanistan, and the ones who stood with him now. And he made his choice. George released Barnabas's throat and stood. "No, you don't get to make me into you. You're going to trial. You're going to prison. And you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life knowing you lost to the people you tried to destroy." Barnabas reached for his ankle, a backup weapon George hadn't seen. "George, down!" Chaines's warning came simultaneously with the gunshot, but Barnabas's aim was wild, compromised by rage and alcohol and desperation. The bullet missed George by inches, struck a metal support beam at an angle, and ricocheted with a metallic scream. Barnabas Campbell was dead before he hit the ground, killed by his own bullet returning to its sender. The warehouse fell silent except for the ringing of ears and the ragged breathing of survivors. George stood over Barnabas's body, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the weight of too many dead men. Chaines appeared at his side. "You good?" "Yeah." George knelt, checking Barnabas's pockets with practiced efficiency. His fingers found it, a flash drive on a simple keychain. Different from the one Gift brought us. A backup, Chaines realized. He was running with evidence. Evidence that's now in our possession. George pocketed the drive, along with everything else in that briefcase. Sirens wailed in the distance, multiple units coming fast. Someone had called it in, probably Marcus Chen, who George could see being loaded into an ambulance with a shoulder wound, already negotiating his cooperation. Detective Walsh arrived with the first wave of police, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the scene. 6 guards in custody or wounded, 1 arms dealer dead from his own ricochet, and the Iron Saints standing in the middle of it all. "Murray," she said flatly, "tell me you have a good explanation for this." George held out the flash drive. Barnabas Campbell's personal records, complete client lists, transaction details, offshore accounts, everything the FBI needs to dismantle his entire network. He gestured to the scattered briefcase contents, plus false passports, cash, and flight manifests showing he was fleeing the country tonight. Walsh took the drive carefully, sealing it in an evidence bag. And the dead body? Self-inflicted. His bullet, his angle, his choice to fire at unarmed men. George met her eyes. "You'll find a dozen witnesses will confirm it, including his own associates." She studied him for a long moment. "You know what this looks like, right? Vigilantes hunting down a suspect. It looks like citizens preventing a dangerous criminal from fleeing justice," Chaines interjected. "We had credible intelligence he was leaving tonight. We responded. With guns. This is America, detective." George's voice was dry. "We have permits for every weapon here, and we only fired in self-defense after his men opened fire on us." It wasn't quite the truth. It wasn't quite a lie. It was the gray area where the Iron Saints lived. Men trying to do good in a world that made good complicated. Walsh sighed. "You're going to need to come in for statements, all of you. This is a mess of jurisdictions and federal interest and—" She stopped herself. "But for what it's worth, that little girl you pulled from the fire, she's going to get to grow up without fear now." "That counts for something." "It counts for everything," George said quietly. As the police processed the scene and the first rays of dawn broke over the warehouse district, George stepped away to make a call. It rang twice before Gift answered. Tiana's phone pressed between both their ears. "George?" Gift's voice was small, hopeful. "Did you? Is Daddy?" "It's over, baby girl. Your daddy can't hurt anyone anymore. You and your mommy are safe now." He heard crying, Gift's relief, Tiana's broken sobs of liberation. In the background, hospital machines beeped their steady rhythm, the sound of life continuing. "Are you okay?" Gift asked. "Did you get hurt?" George looked at his brothers, battered, exhausted, but alive. He looked at the warehouse where a monster had made his last stand. He looked at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of redemption. "We're all okay," he said. "The good kind of scary always comes home." "I knew you would," Gift said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Heroes always do." George closed his eyes, letting those words wash over him. Hero, not monster, not killer, not the broken man who'd failed his sister and his brothers, and everyone he'd tried to protect. Hero. Maybe, he thought, maybe that's who he'd been trying to become all along. "We're heading back now," George told her. "Tell your mommy we're bringing evidence that'll keep her safe forever. Tell her the nightmare's over." "I will. And George?" Gift's voice went soft. "Thank you for being the men with leather jackets and big hearts, just like Mommy promised." George's throat tightened. "Thank you for trusting us, for giving us the chance to be the heroes you believed we were." He ended the call and turned to his brothers, these scarred, violent, beautiful men who'd ridden into hell for a child they barely knew. "Let's go home," George said. The Iron Saints mounted their bikes as the sun rose higher, burning away the night's shadows. They rode back through the awakening city not as outlaws or vigilantes, but as men who'd finally found their redemption in the trust of a 7-year-old girl. Behind them, the warehouse smoldered. Ahead of them, a new day dawned. And somewhere in a hospital room, a mother held her daughter and believed, finally, truly believed, that they were safe. 6 months later. The federal courthouse was packed. Every seat filled, standing room only, news cameras crowding the hallway outside courtroom 7. The trial of United States versus Campbell had become a media sensation. The arms dealer who'd beaten his wife for years, the 7-year-old who'd collected evidence, and the motorcycle club that had saved them both. George sat in the 3rd row, wearing the only suit he owned. It felt wrong, too tight, too formal, too much like the man he'd been before the club. But this was important. This was Gift and Tiana's day. He could wear a damn suit. Beside him sat Chains, Ratchet, Smoke, and Tiny, all similarly uncomfortable in their courtroom attire. They looked like bears forced into tuxedos. But they were here, every one of them, because family showed up. The prosecution's case had been devastating. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and expert witnesses systematically dismantling Barnabas Campbell's empire and reputation. The flash drive Gift had carried, combined with Tiana's meticulously documented abuse and the evidence recovered from Barnabas's final escape attempt, had given prosecutors everything they needed. Arms trafficking charges, money laundering, conspiracy, domestic violence, attempted murder. The only reason it wasn't a murder trial was because Barnabas had died on that warehouse floor, killed by his own bullet. Sometimes, George thought, the universe had its own sense of justice. Today was Tiana's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, her scars visible. She'd refused to cover the burn marks on her arms, the faint discoloration that remained around her eye from the final beating. "Let them see what he did," she'd told George. "Let them see what survival looks like." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Reyes, approached gently. Mrs. Campbell, can you tell the court about your marriage to Barnabas Campbell? Tiana's voice was steady, clear. He started hitting me 3 months after our wedding. Small things at first. A shove, a grab that left bruises. He said it was my fault, that I made him angry. I believed him. She described years of escalating violence, of police calls that went nowhere because Barnabas had connections, of hospital visits where she lied about falling downstairs, of slowly realizing that no one was coming to save her. She'd have to save herself. When did you start documenting the abuse? When I got pregnant with Gift. Tiana's hands clasped together. I thought about what kind of life my daughter would have, growing up watching her father hurt her mother. I thought about what I'd want her to do if she were ever in my situation. And I realized I had to model survival, not victimhood. So you collected evidence. For 3 years, photos, recordings, videos, I hid copies in multiple locations. I taught Gift what to do if things got worse. Tiana's voice wavered for the first time. I taught my 7-year-old daughter to document domestic violence and run for help. That's what Barnabas reduced us to. The prosecutor introduced the evidence, piece by piece, methodically, letting each photo and recording speak for itself. The courtroom listened to Tiana's voice, begging Barnabas to stop. They heard Gift crying in the background. They saw the progression of injuries, each one more severe than the last. Several jurors were crying. The judge's expression was granite. Mrs. Campbell, why didn't you just leave? It was the question everyone always asked. The question that showed how little people understood. I tried, twice. Tiana's voice was firm now. The first time, he found me within a week. He broke 3 of my ribs and promised if I ever left again, he'd kill me and take Gift where I'd never find her. The second time I went to the police, an officer told me it was a domestic matter and suggested marriage counseling. He called Barnabas from the station to come pick me up. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. That officer, we later discovered, was on Barnabas's payroll. Prosecutor Reyes added, he's currently facing his own charges. The testimony continued for hours. Tiana explained the night Gift ran, how she'd pretended to be unconscious while Barnabas passed out drunk, how she'd whispered final instructions to her daughter, how she'd given Gift the bag that contained their only hope for justice. I sent my baby out into the night alone because staying meant we'd both die, Tiana said, tears finally falling. And I prayed that the men I'd heard about, the ones who protected women like me, I prayed they'd be what I needed them to be. She looked directly at George. They were. They saved my life. They protected my daughter when the system failed us. They made sure Barnabas couldn't hurt anyone else. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she'd exaggerated, that the evidence was fabricated, that the Iron Saints had influenced her testimony. But Tiana was unshakable. She'd lived through hell and collected receipts. There was no cross-examination that could undo 3 years of documented truth. When she stepped down, the entire courtroom stood, a spontaneous show of respect for a woman who'd survived the unsurvivable. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. Barnabas Campbell's co-conspirators, Marcus Chen and 4 others, received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. The corrupt police officers who'd taken Barnabas's money were facing their own trials. But the most important verdict had already been delivered. Gift and Tiana were free. Present day. The Iron Saints compound had changed. Where once only motorcycles and tools had lined the yard, now there were other things. A swing set that Ratchet had built, slightly crooked but sturdy. A basketball hoop that Chains had installed. A picnic table where, on sunny afternoons, you might find a little girl doing homework, while bikers argued about carburetor settings. Gift Campbell, 8 years old now, taller, confident, had become a permanent fixture at the compound. She and Tiana lived in a safe apartment across town, but most afternoons after school, Tiana would drop her daughter off at the place where their nightmare had ended and their new life had begun. Today was special. The documentary crew had finally finished their film about the case. Tonight was the premiere at the local theater. But before that, Gift had something important to do. She sat at the picnic table in her favorite pink dress, not the same one from that night, but similar, a reminder of the girl she'd been and the young woman she was becoming. Her pink bag lay beside her, but instead of evidence, it now carried crayons, markers, colored pencils, and paper. She called it her hero bag. George approached slowly, carrying 2 bottles of root beer. "What you working on, baby girl?" Gift looked up with a smile that could light the darkest corners. "A picture, for you and the brothers, to say thank you." "You've already said thank you about 1,000 times," George chuckled, sitting down beside her. "But this is the real thank you, the kind that lasts forever." Gift held up her drawing. George's breath caught. The picture showed 12 figures in leather vests standing in a protective circle. In the center, a small girl with wild hair and a pink dress held a bag covered in hearts. Above the scene, in Gift's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were 2 words: "My family." But it was the details that broke him. She'd drawn each biker with identifying features: Chains's beard, Ratchet's tool belt, Smoke's sunglasses, Tiny's youth. And in the background, she'd drawn Tiana watching with a smile. In the corner, barely visible, was a 13th figure walking away. Reaper, his back turned, his vest colorless. Even in her art, Gift understood complexity, understood that people could be flawed, and still deserved to be remembered. "Gift, this is—" George's voice cracked. "This is beautiful." "Mommy says art should tell the truth," Gift explained, adding final touches with a purple crayon. "The truth is, you're my family. Not because of blood, but because you showed up when no one else would. Because you were brave when I needed brave. Because you were the good kind of scary." The other bikers had gathered around, drawn by the moment. Chains wiped his eyes and pretended it was allergies. Ratchet cleared his throat repeatedly. Tiny didn't even pretend. He just cried openly. "We're just a bunch of broken-down bikers," George said softly. "We've all done things we're not proud of. We're not heroes, Gift." "Yes, you are." Gift's voice was certain. "Heroes aren't people who've never done bad things. Heroes are people who choose to do good things even when it's hard, even when they're scared, even when nobody's watching." She stood up on the bench and kissed George's cheek. "I told Mommy you're the good kind of scary. She said that's the best kind of hero there is." George pulled her into a hug. This child who'd run barefoot through the night and changed everything. "You know what I think?" he whispered. "What?" "I think we didn't save you. I think you saved us." Gift pulled back, confused. "How did I save you?" George looked around at his brothers, men who'd been lost in violence and regret, searching for purpose in the bottom of bottles and the roar of engines. Men who'd found themselves by protecting someone more fragile than themselves. "You reminded us why we formed this club in the first place," George explained, "to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. to be the kind of men who stand between the innocent and the monsters. You gave us a reason to be better than we were. Plus, Chains added with a grin, you make way better hot chocolate than any of us. Gift laughed, a sound like bells, like hope, like the future they'd all fought to give her. Tiana arrived then, pulling up in the modest sedan she'd bought with money from the Victims' Compensation Fund. She was healthier now, stronger, pursuing her paralegal degree online while working part-time at a women's shelter. Her scars had faded, but not disappeared, a reminder that survival was beautiful even when it wasn't pretty. "Ready for the premiere?" she called out. Gift grabbed her hero bag and the drawing. "Can we bring this? I want everyone to see my family." "Of course, baby." Tiana looked at George, and in her eyes was a gratitude that went beyond words. He'd given her back her life, her daughter, her future. "Thank you," she mouthed. George nodded. No words were necessary between survivors. The Iron Saints convoy to the theater was a sight to behold. 10 motorcycles escorting one sedan, leather vests and pink dresses. Survivors and protectors rolling together through streets that had once felt dangerous, but now felt like home. The documentary was powerful. It told their story honestly. The violence, the fear, the system failures, and the unlikely heroes who'd stepped in. When Gift's face appeared on screen, explaining in her child's voice how her mommy had taught her to collect evidence, the theater went silent, except for the sound of crying. When the credits rolled to thunderous applause, Gift stood on her seat and pointed at the Iron Saints scattered throughout the audience. "Those are my heroes!" she shouted with 8-year-old enthusiasm. "The men with leather jackets and big hearts!" The standing ovation wasn't just for the documentary. It was for them. For choosing to be better. For protecting the vulnerable. For proving that redemption was possible. Later that night, after the crowds dispersed and the excitement faded, George returned to the compound alone. He sat on his Harley in the garage, staring at Gift's drawing that he'd already had framed and hung on the clubhouse wall. 12 bikers and one little girl. My family. He thought about the sister he couldn't save, the brothers he'd lost in Afghanistan, the years of guilt and violence and searching for purpose. And he thought about a 7-year-old girl who'd run barefoot through the night, clutching a bag full of evidence and hope, believing that somewhere in the darkness were men who would fight monsters. She'd been right. George pulled out his phone and texted the group chat. "Church tomorrow. We need to talk about expanding our protection work. There are more kids out there like Gift. More families that need the good kind of scary." The responses came immediately. Chains, "I'm in." Ratchet, "Count me in." Smoke, "Hell yes." Tiny, "For Gift and everyone like her." George smiled. They'd found their purpose, not in revenge or violence or the outlaw life they'd once embraced, but in protection, in being the shield between the innocent and the cruel. He looked at the drawing one more time. In the corner, Gift had added one final detail he hadn't noticed before. A small pink bag with a heart on it and words in her careful handwriting. "This is my hero bag. It saved my mommy. It saved me and it saved 12 bikers who forgot they could be heroes." George whispered to the empty garage, to the ghosts of his past, to the future they were building. "We didn't save her. She saved us." And in that moment, surrounded by motorcycles and memories and the promise of tomorrow, George Murray, president of the Iron Saints, former soldier, reformed criminal, and reluctant hero, finally forgave himself for all the people he couldn't save, because he'd saved the one who'd needed him most. And she, in turn, had saved him right back.